Everybody's on board. That's what a man told a towing dispatcher on July 4th from a sinking boat near the west tip of Horn Island. 4 hours later, that boat pulled away from the island without Nolan Xavier Wells on it. 2 days after that, a National Park Service ranger found his body in the water off the northwestern tip of that same island. Tomorrow morning, Nolan will be laid to rest at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He was 18 years old. Before that happens, here's what you need to know. 4 separate threads in this case have just converged, almost in the same week, and each one changes something about how we understand his final hours. A young woman named Katie, largely unidentified for most of this case, has an account of Nolan's last conversation that flatly doesn't match what his friends told investigators. GPS records have placed that sinking boat and its distress call in roughly the same stretch of coastline where his body was later found. The case is now formally headed toward a grand jury, and a former judge with direct prior history against the prosecutor now handling it has issued a pointed public warning about where this might be headed. We're going to walk through all 4. And we're going to be precise about which parts are confirmed and which are still theory, because in this case, that distinction has mattered more than almost anything else. If you're new here, this is what we do. Developing cases, followed all the way through, verified against real reporting rather than speculation. Hit subscribe if you want to follow this one with us, all the way to that grand jury. 2 people were with Nolan in his last confirmed minutes on Horn Island, his friends, and a young woman they only ever referred to by her first name. For nearly 2 weeks, one of those 2 accounts barely surfaced publicly, while the other quietly became accepted fact simply through repetition. That's where we start. Her name is Katie. For much of this case, that's nearly all the public knew about her. Not her last name, not where she was from, not even confirmation that she'd made it home safely. She wasn't part of the first wave of coverage. She wasn't mentioned in the family's early statements. While online speculation chased pool parties and out-of-context video clips, the one person who may have spoken with Nolan last stayed almost entirely out of view. Think about how unusual that actually is in a case that's otherwise been picked apart in extraordinary detail. Every friend on that boat has been named, discussed, scrutinized. A judge's public statement has been read line by line for what it did and didn't say. And yet the one account that might resolve the central contradiction of this entire case sat almost completely outside public view for nearly 2 weeks, while an evolving cast of secondhand claims and anonymous posts filled the space where her actual words should have been. Part of that traces back to the very first night Nolan went missing. According to someone who was on the phone with his mother, Christine Wansley, as she tried to figure out where her son was, Katie's name entered that conversation almost by accident, mentioned as someone Nolan had reportedly wanted to stay behind with. Then came a detail that made an already terrifying night considerably worse. Word that Katie herself might be missing too, with nobody on that call able to say who she actually was or where to even begin looking. Picture that moment. A mother already searching for one missing child, suddenly told there might be 2, with no name to attach to the second worry and no number to call. Just more fear stacked on top of fear that already had nowhere left to go. That particular fear turned out to be unfounded. Katie was never missing. She'd left the island safely that day on a different boat and had been reachable the entire time. Confirmation of that came not from police and not from Nolan's friends, but from Katie's own mother, Gracie McCormack, who posted publicly once speculation about her daughter started spreading online in ways she never expected. According to McCormack, her daughter was on Horn Island that day, spent time with Nolan, and the 2 parted ways sometime that afternoon. She said her daughter has no knowledge of what happened to him afterward. She said goodbye to him, got on a different boat, and went home. If that were the whole story, it would end there, quietly, the way most small footnotes in a larger tragedy tend to end. It doesn't, because of what Katie's account actually says about that final conversation. It's worth pausing to consider what this has been like for Katie herself. By every account, she did nothing more than have an ordinary conversation with someone at the beach before going home safely on a different boat than the one he was supposed to take. She never asked to become part of a national story, and yet her name and her recollection of a few brief minutes on a beach has become one of the most scrutinized details in an investigation being followed by millions of people. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, has said Katie's account of that final conversation has been specific and hasn't wavered, and that it conflicts directly with what Nolan's friends told investigators. According to Katie, Nolan told her he was planning to rejoin his friends and get back on their boat before they left the island. According to the friends themselves, Nolan told them the opposite, that he intended to stay behind on the island with Katie, entirely by his own choice. Both statements cannot be accurate. One of these two accounts is wrong. And right now, as of this recording, nobody, not the family, not investigators, not anyone with actual authority to say for certain, has resolved which one it is. If Katie's version holds up, something interrupted whatever plan Nolan had between stating his intention to leave and the boat actually pulling away without him. Nobody has explained what. If the friend's version holds up, Nolan made a deliberate, conscious choice to remain alone on a remote barrier island, which raises an entirely different question about what happened to him in the hours that followed. There's a particular kind of pain in that specific uncertainty, different from grief itself. Grief, terrible as it is, at least has a shape. It's the loss of a person you loved. This is something else. It's the loss of even knowing your own son's last decision. Did he choose to stay, or did he intend to come home? For most families, that would be an easy thing to answer, pieced together from small confirmations that never even register as important until they're needed. For Nolan's parents, it has become the single hardest unanswered question in this entire case. While that contradiction sits unresolved, hard data has continued to fill in the rest of the timeline. According to GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained by CBS News, the boat carrying Nolan and his friends left its dock at approximately 9:56 that morning. By 11:14, it had reached Horn Island. At 4:31 that afternoon, the boat left Horn Island. Nolan was not on board. It returned to its original dock, and then, rather than staying there for the night, it kept moving. At 5:52, it traveled into Fort Bayou. By 6:06, it was back at the dock. Later that night, at 7:19, its tracked position shifted once more to the Fort Bayou boat launch, before being taken out of the water and moved overland, presumably towed by vehicle, to a residence in Biloxi owned by the boat's owners. 4 separate movements, recorded automatically, after the moment Nolan was left behind. That sequence remains the exact window investigators are still working to fully explain. It's worth remembering why this kind of data matters more than any single witness account. GPS records don't depend on anyone's memory, anyone's honesty, or anyone's willingness to come forward. They're generated automatically, independent of what anyone later chooses to say about that day. That doesn't make them perfect evidence. They show where a vessel was, not who was aboard it or what was happening on it. But they do give investigators, and now the public, a fixed, objective skeleton, a real timeline that every witness account can be measured against going forward. Crime scene analyst Cheryl McCollum made a version of this same point on News Nation, noting that data like this will ultimately be what verifies or contradicts the group's account, since they'd already spoken to family members and investigators before the tracking records became public. If their story doesn't line up completely with what the boat's own data shows, that's a real problem for their credibility. Investigators have specifically asked for original, unedited photos and video taken on July 4th, particularly anything showing alleged altercations, or anything involving Nolan directly, according to CNN's reporting on the case. That request alone tells you something about where the gaps in the current account still sit. Here's what's confirmed. The timestamps themselves, verified through official state marine resources data. Here's what remains theory. Why the boat made those additional stops before finally returning home for the night, and what, if anything, that reveals about the hours right after Nolan was separated from the group. Investigators haven't answered that publicly. Neither should we pretend to. So here's where things sit right now. Katie's account, relayed through her mother and echoed by the family's attorney, directly contradicts what Nolan's friends told investigators about his final intentions. GPS records confirm the boat's movements down to the minute, but don't explain why it stopped 4 separate times before finally heading home for the night. Now there's a third piece, and it adds real weight to the location question. Audio surfaced this week of a call placed to a towing service after the friend's boat began taking on water. The caller reported they were near the west end of Horn Island and that a bilge pump had failed. Asked whether everyone aboard was safe, the caller confirmed everyone was on board. That call reportedly came in roughly 30 minutes before GPS shows the boat actually departing the island, meaning if the caller's account is accurate, Nolan was still with the group at that point. Sheriff John Ledbetter has said Nolan's body was found near the northwestern tip of Horn Island. That's not necessarily the identical spot as the west end referenced in the tow call. Barrier islands don't work that precisely, and 2 days of tides and current can carry a body a meaningful distance from wherever an incident actually occurred. So while some coverage of this case has taken that overlap, the tow call's location and the body's eventual location, and concluded that whatever happened to Nolan must have occurred specifically in that window, that's an inference. It is not, as of this recording, a confirmed finding from a medical examiner or any official investigative source. What it does establish is a real, documented discrepancy worth asking about plainly. If everyone was reported on board during that call, and Nolan wasn't with the group by the time they reached shore, something happened in that specific window between the call and the boat's 4:31 departure. That's not speculation. That's simply what the 2 data points, side by side, actually show. Investigators, not commentators online, are the ones equipped to work out tidal charts, current patterns, and exact positioning over a 48-hour window. That's exactly the kind of technical question this case still needs a real answer to. If you found this update useful so far, subscribing genuinely helps. This channel exists to track cases like this one all the way through, past the viral moment, to what actually happens after. On July 15th, Nolan's parents met face-to-face for the first time with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the family, described the meeting as respectful. Out of it came confirmation of something the public had been waiting on for 2 weeks. Once the Jackson County Sheriff's Office completes its investigation, the findings will be presented to a grand jury. It's worth being precise about what that actually means, because it's the kind of phrase that gets repeated online without much explanation. A grand jury referral is not a verdict. It is not a formal accusation against any one person. It does not mean charges have been filed, and it does not mean investigators have concluded a crime took place. It means the case has reached a procedural point where its findings will be formally reviewed to determine whether charges are warranted at all. Not everyone is reading that development the same way, and the disagreement between 2 credentialed attorneys here is worth sitting with rather than resolving. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has spoken out publicly, drawing on his own prior experience with McElrath's office. Moore represented the family of Antoine Sims, a man killed by a Moss Point police officer in 2019. A case Moore has said involved what he considered overwhelming evidence, and one where, he says, the office was ultimately unable to secure an indictment. Moore has argued publicly that if the circumstances in this case were reversed, an arrest would already have happened, and he said he intends to keep watching this case closely to see whether it follows a similar path. Attorney Tyler Bailey has offered a meaningfully different read on the exact same procedural step. According to Bailey, a grand jury referral is standard, routine procedure in this county for any unnatural or suspicious death, not on its own evidence that foul play is confirmed or even strongly suspected. That's worth holding on to directly. 2 attorneys looking at the identical fact, reaching very different conclusions. Moore's skepticism is rooted in real, specific history with this particular office. Bailey's explanation is rooted in how this kind of referral typically functions as a matter of standard process. Both things can be true at the same time. This can be routine procedure, and this DA's specific track record can still be worth watching closely. The real test, as both attorneys would likely agree, isn't the meeting or the referral itself. It's what actually happens once the grand jury receives whatever evidence this investigation ultimately produces. At that same July 15th meeting, both sides agreed to something specific: a joint inspection of Nolan's phone, with family-hired experts and official investigators examining the device together, rather than releasing separate, competing findings after the fact. As of this recording, that inspection still hasn't taken place. That pattern of waiting deserves to be named plainly. From the initial search, to the state autopsy, to the independent autopsy funded in part by Colin Kaepernick, to this meeting with the DA, every major development in this case has arrived on its own separate timeline, and the family has had to wait through each one, often longer than initially suggested. Neither the state's autopsy results nor the independent findings have been made public as of this update. The cause of Nolan's death has still not been officially determined. There's also been clearer confirmation this week of exactly why the FBI has been involved at all. According to an official statement from FBI Jackson, the Bureau's assistance has centered specifically on threats made against individuals connected to this investigation, threats that reportedly cross state lines, which is what brought them under federal jurisdiction in the first place. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency throughout, from the very first search to whatever comes next. The FBI's role has been support, not command. That distinction matters because it's been easy to overstate. Federal involvement here isn't a sign investigators suspect a federal crime in Nolan's death itself. It's tied specifically to protecting people connected to the case from a documented pattern of interstate harassment. That's a sobering detail in its own right. It means this case has generated threats serious and widespread enough to become a federal matter, entirely separate from the question of what actually happened to Nolan on that island. At the same time, local authorities have said, as of this recording, that they haven't found evidence of foul play and haven't classified this as a criminal investigation. That sits directly alongside the family's continued public call for a fully transparent process. And both of those things are currently true simultaneously. That tension is a large part of why this case has continued to draw national attention 2 weeks in. Before we move any further, two claims that spread widely deserve to be addressed directly, since both shaped public belief about this case before anyone actually verified them. The first was a photograph showing Nolan at a pool party, which many people took as proof he'd been alive well after July 4th. That photo was later confirmed, through image metadata and an account from a friend, to have actually been taken about a week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. The second was a viral video many believed captured Nolan in an argument shortly before he disappeared. The person whose voice is actually on that recording has confirmed, directly and more than once, that the voice is his own, not Nolan's. Both corrections point to the same underlying pattern. In the vacuum created by two pending autopsies and an investigation still gathering evidence, unverified claims have consistently moved faster than confirmed facts. A photo, stripped of context, became evidence of a cover-up. A misidentified recording became evidence of a confrontation involving Nolan himself. Both turned out to mean something entirely different once someone with actual first-hand knowledge stepped forward to correct the record. That pattern is worth remembering every time a new piece of unverified content starts circulating about this case, because it's already happened at least twice. If you want this channel to keep separating what's actually confirmed from what's just spreading online, subscribing helps us keep doing exactly that, case by case. Amid all of this, Nolan's parents have had to finalize something no parent should ever have to plan. Christine Wansley shared the details on social media. The funeral will be held tomorrow, Monday, July 20th, at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation runs from 9 to 11 that morning, with the funeral beginning immediately after. Afterward, the family will hold what Christine has repeatedly described as a celebration, rather than a traditional gathering, at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, open to family, friends, and Nolan's teammates, current and former. That framing has been consistent throughout everything this family has said publicly. Christine has described her son as someone who brought people together and made sure nobody around him felt left out. His father, Elmore, has described him on Good Morning America as a quiet leader, not big on words, bigger on action. Shaping his funeral around that same spirit, rather than around the grief and suspicion that have otherwise defined this case for 2 weeks, is its own kind of statement. Christine has continued to publicly acknowledge the people who've stood beside this family. Filmmaker Tyler Perry is covering the cost of the funeral. Colin Kaepernick helped fund the independent autopsy. And at nearly every public appearance since this began, she's repeated the same specific request: that any demonstrations held in Nolan's name stay peaceful, because that's who she says her son actually was. There's something worth noting in how consistently she's repeated that exact request across weeks of press conferences, interviews, and posts. It would be understandable, given everything this family has endured, for that message to eventually harden into something angrier. Instead, it stayed exactly the same: calm, specific, and rooted in who she says her son actually was, even as she continues, in the same breath, to demand real answers about how he ended up in that water in the first place. So, pulling this update together, Katie's account, relayed through her mother and echoed by the family's own attorney, directly contradicts the friend group's version of Nolan's final conversation, and that contradiction remains unresolved by anyone with the authority to resolve it. GPS data has placed the friend's distress call in roughly the same stretch of coastline where Nolan's body was later found, a genuinely significant overlap, though the specific theory that it pinpoints exactly when he disappeared remains an inference, not a confirmed finding. The case is now formally headed toward a grand jury, a real procedural step, though 2 credentialed attorneys read what that step actually signals in very different ways. And the joint phone inspection agreed to nearly 2 weeks ago still hasn't happened, with neither autopsy's results yet made public. Nolan Wells was 18. 2 separate accounts of his very last conversation still can't agree, in a case where the hard data, the GPS, the audio, the timestamps, keeps adding detail without yet delivering an answer. Tomorrow, his parents will do something no parent should have to plan, while continuing, in the same breath, to demand the truth about how he ended up in that water in the first place. Katie, meanwhile, remains largely out of public view herself, her account known only through her mother's public statements. Whatever happens next, whether the phone inspection finally takes place, whether the grand jury eventually convenes, whether the overlap between that distress call and his body's location turns out to mean something or nothing at all, her recollection of those final minutes on the beach may end up being one of the most important pieces of this entire story, however quietly it arrived. We'll keep following this case as that phone inspection finally happens, as both autopsy results come in, and as this moves through the grand jury process, bringing you the facts once they're actually verified, and not a moment before. If you want to be there for that next update, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.